Sorry about that. I was muted. Week 13, studs and duds. Starting off with Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. He had 354 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 rushing attempts, 9 yards, and a touchdown. So he did get that rushing touchdown to go along with 2 touchdowns. So 3 total touchdowns for Dak Prescott. Like I was saying when I was muted, they were down 21 and nothing at one point. They crawled all the way back, and Brandon Aubrey kicked that game-winning field goal. So Dak Prescott finishes his day 28.06 fantasy points. So Dak Prescott gets our stud of the week. Like I was saying, how we do things here, we're going to start with our starts and sits. Then we're going to go to our studs and duds, and then we're also going to look at our roster to see how we did in week 12. Let's move on with our RB stud there, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Now, Gibbs, this was exactly the performance that you needed, especially these crucial weeks heading into the fantasy football playoffs. Gibbs had 15 rushing attempts, 219 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had 11 catches for 45 yards and 1 touchdown. So Gibbs continues to be one of the more elite running backs, not only in the rushing volume, but also the receiving volume as well. Good enough for 59.4 fantasy points, and the Lions got a crucial victory at home against the Giants. In overtime, looked like the Giants were just going to be in control for the majority of that game. You saw Jameis Winston have a good fantasy day. Wan'Dale Robinson also had a good day as well. But Jahmyr Gibbs, 59.4 fantasy points. So hopefully if you had Jahmyr Gibbs in your starting lineup, you ended up winning. Was it not so pleasant, though, to go up against a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs this week? Speaking of Wan'Dale Robinson, he is our wide receiver stud of the week. And Wan'Dale Robinson, he's kind of been a roller coaster ride as the wide receiver one for this New York Giants team. You know, heading back earlier in the season when we did have Malik Nabers as the wide receiver one, Wan'Dale Robinson's big game came in that high-scoring shootout against the Dallas Cowboys. And really outside of that, it hasn't really been too pleasant for Wan'Dale Robinson. But this was one of more Wan'Dale Robinson's blow-up games against the Detroit Lions. 9 receptions, 156 yards, and 1 touchdown. So you really didn't see a drop-off from, going to a guy like Jackson Dart to Jameis Winston. So we'll see if Jackson Dart does return in the Giants Week 13 game coming up here. But we'll see if it's Jameis Winston or not. We will get into that in our news and injuries segment here coming up later on in the show. But 30.6 fantasy points, that's exactly what you're looking for. I know that I started Wan'Dale Robinson in my flex, ended up working out for me in the victory. So hopefully you did the same as well. But Wan'Dale Robinson, continue to put him in your starting lineups, especially into your flex. But Wan'Dale Robinson continues to be the wide receiver one role. You're just going to have some of these games where maybe it's like 5-6 points, and then you'll have these blow-up games where it's 30.6 fantasy points. It's kind of just which Wan'Dale Robinson are you going to get every single week. Now let's move on to our tight end stud of the week, and that's going to be Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. And Hunter Henry has really been consistent over the past couple of weeks, especially with the level of play from Drake May in this Patriots offense. Now the Patriots moving to 10-2 on the season. They ended up surviving against the Cincinnati Bengals on the road. And Hunter Henry continues to be a very focal point of this offense. 7 receptions, 115 yards, and 1 passing touchdown. Good enough for 24.5 fantasy points on the day. So Hunter Henry continues to be a top 5 rest of the season tight end the rest of the way, especially like I mentioned with the way that this offense has been playing. All right, that is our studs of the week. Now let's go on to the duds of the week. And we did see the return of Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers, and it was still a win for the 49ers, but it was definitely a dud performance for Brock Purdy in his return to this offense. 193 passing yards. He did have 1 passing touchdown that came in the first half to Jawan Jennings, but he also had 3 interceptions. But good thing for the 49ers, they did have those 3 interceptions, for the Panthers, all in all, only had 9 points in the game. Brock Purdy finishes with 10.32 fantasy points. It was a tough matchup. The Carolina Panthers have definitely been a defense that's been one of the more underrated units in all the league this year. So it was a tough matchup. I expect some better matchups in the future for Brock Purdy in this offense. So I'm not too much out of Brock Purdy in this offense. Just play him in right matchups, bench him in matchups when he's going up against some volatile defenses. But Brock Purdy is our quarterback dud of the week. Now let's move on to our RB dud, and that's going to be DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. At this point, has Cobb Manungai really taken over this backfield? I guess time will tell over the next couple of weeks of the season. But DeAndre Swift did have a fumble in this game. Overall, he did have 8 rushing attempts, 15 yards, only 1 catch for 14 yards. So he's not going to give you too much receiving volume. So that's why you're only seeing 1 reception for 14 yards. But the Bears and Caleb Williams had a phenomenal fantasy outing. He had 3 passing touchdowns, and the Bears ended up winning another game to vault them to first place in the NFC North, but 1.9 fantasy points. Especially a guy like your starting line, DeAndre Swift, that's exactly what you do not want to see in your fantasy lineups, like I mentioned, especially with the fantasy playoffs looming. Now let's move on to the wide receiver dud, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions, and we have been seeing a lot of these. 0 receptions, 0 yards, whether that's the tight end position or the wide receiver position. Jameson Williams have been the definition of a roller coaster ride this season. He could have a couple of touchdowns and a big play to get you to 20-plus fantasy points, or you can have like this where it's just 0 across the board and you just absolutely nothing. In a game where the Lions offense really played well, I mean, most of the production, as you saw from my RB stud of the week, did come from Jahmyr Gibbs. So as the Jahmyr Gibbs game is also Amon-Ra St. Brown. He did get a touchdown, had over 130 yards receiving on the day. So Jameson Williams, just another bust game for him in the matchup coming ahead, which we'll get into for our starts and sits, is not going to ease up for both the Lions and Jameson Williams to have a bounce-back game on Turkey Day. Now let's move on to our tight end dud, and yep, he's back, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. I do like the matchup, though. This week, we will get into our starts and sits in just a couple of moments. But Mark Andrews, it feels like he has just been the most named tight end here in our tight end dud for this week, but only 1 catch, 9 yards. This is not going to cut it. 2.1 fantasy points against the Cleveland Browns defense, so that has been good at times this season. But you've been starting this guy pretty much every single week of the season, and it's been more bust games than boom games here in 2025, especially with all the injuries. You know, Lamar Jackson was out for several games, and then this offense has just been discombobulated. They are starting to improve overall as a team. They are now right in the thick of the AFC North race with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with Pittsburgh losing to Chicago on the road. So that's going to open up a really good stretch there for the AFC North race. But Mark Andrews, a dud, but I do expect to bounce back, in which we're going to get into the matchup there in just a few moments. So that's our tight end, wide receiver studs, and all the studs and duds of the week. Let me know down in the comments who you think is your stud and dud of the week for week number 12. All right, let's go ahead and dive into week 13. As we always do here, we do want to get into the latest news and injuries. Heading into week 13, just kind of give you a perspective of how many injuries are piling up, because this has definitely been not so fun of a year for injuries overall. But just looking at the Buffalo Bills is going to be our first news bit that we're going to be getting into. They added help at the wide receiver position. They signed veteran Brandon Cooks. Now, Brandon Cooks, the majority of the season has been on the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, I believe, last week when they were on the bye, they released Brandon Cooks, so he was on the waivers, and Brandon Cooks got scooped up. I'm not saying that you have to immediately get a guy like Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks didn't really do too much in the New Orleans Saints offense. Now you could, pose the question, well, maybe it was just because the New Orleans Saints have been a terrible offense this season. However, just looking at the wide receivers, Keon Coleman, he's been dealing with an injury. Khalil Shakir is still the wide receiver 1. And then we'll see if Dalton Kincaid is coming back from injury this week. But, the Bills had one of their worst offensive outings. Josh Allen only had 10 fantasy points. James Cook was the lone bright spot for Buffalo in their Week 12 matchup against the Houston Texans on Thursday night. But I do expect this Buffalo offense to improve. They need to, especially if they want to lock up a playoff spot, because right now it's not looking too hot for Buffalo. But Brandon Cooks did sign on Tuesday, so he will be on the active roster. He's going to practice, and we'll see him on the field on Sunday afternoon. Now let's continue to move on there. Joe Burrow on return to 3-8 Bengals, not sitting if healthy. So looking like we are going to be getting Joe Burrow potentially back this week, which is going to be huge news, not only for the Cincinnati Bengals. Well, they're 3-8, so there's not really much to play for. for Cincinnati. But that's huge news if you have Jamar Chase, because Jamar Chase was suspended last week due to spitting on Jalen Ramsey, but he will be coming off of that suspension, so he'll be ready to go. For the Bengals, you'll also have T. Higgins. Chase Brown continues to be a really good running back in fantasy. Even when the Bengals offense hasn't really been producing, he has been putting up some good numbers both in the rushing and the receiving department. So if we do see Joe Burrow back this week, that's definitely huge news if you have Jamar Chase, Chase Brown, and T. Higgins. Now let's continue to move on with our news. We did have some news coming out of New Orleans, just kicker news. They did release Blake Grupe. It will be signed Cade York over Justin Tucker. If you saw the report yesterday, the Saints today we're going to be bringing in Justin Tucker and Cade York. They ended up signing with Cade York, so that is a new kicker situation in New Orleans. If you're looking for a kicker, that probably wouldn't be the one for me. That's kind of a wait and see. Let's continue to go on there. The Kansas City Chiefs have confirmed that Isaiah Pacheco will be returning from a knee injury. That return is slated on Thursday against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Kareem Hunt has, coming off of a good showing, 20 fantasy points in the Week 12 matchup for the Chiefs. It is a good matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys defense have been giving up a ton of yards to both receivers, tight ends, and running backs. So if you need a guy like Isaiah Pacheco, if he's available to you, coming off an injury, though, Kareem Hunt has taken over this backfield. So, if you desperately do need a running back, maybe go pick him up. But I would, there's definitely some better running backs that we were going to get into there in our waiver wire videos. But I don't think that's, pretty much all of the news and injuries that I'm seeing there. We did see Shedeur Sanders get his first NFL start. I think he looked, not really fantastic, but he looked pretty good against the Las Vegas Raiders in that victory. So good win there for the Browns. We will see if Shedeur Sanders gets to start again, because the other rookie, Dylan Gabriel, has been in the concussion protocol. Just looks like some other news coming out of the Chargers camp. Head coach Jim Harbaugh, announced the practice window is being open for running back Amari Hampton, who has not played since Week 5 against Washington due to ankle injury. We'll see if he plays or not. If he doesn't, I would still start Kamani Vidal. But that would definitely be huge news if you do have Amari Hampton. He's been out for quite a while now. Week number 5. That's been a lot of weeks. That's piling up. So we will probably see Amari Hampton at the very least once the fantasy playoffs are underway. The NFL suspending Panthers safety Trevon Moehrig, 1 game for striking 49ers wide receiver Jawan Jennings in the groin there on Monday night. But, however, I still like the Panthers' defense moving forward if they do have a nice matchup. I believe that is all of our news and injuries that we have. Just keep track on that. It's only Tuesday. Once we get the injury reports, on Wednesday and even to Thursday. We do have some Thursday night games. It is Thursday games. Since it is Thanksgiving, I believe there's 3 games. They'll have a game on Friday between the Bears and the Eagles. So just keep in mind that on the schedule. I know that a lot of people are going to be hanging out with friends and family on Thanksgiving, so be sure to set your lineups before you stuff your face with turkey and all of that goodness. So that is our news and injuries heading into week number 13. That's definitely good news that Amari Hampton is going to be back on the practice field. It looks like we are going to be seeing the return of Joe Burrow in week number 13. All right, let's go ahead and kick off our Week 13 fantasy starts and sits. As we always do here, we give you 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 2 tight ends to start, and we give you 1 of each position to sit. So let's go ahead and start with our Week 13 starts, and that is going to be Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos. Now, the Broncos, one of the few teams coming off of Week 12 bye week. Now they'll have a nice matchup against the Washington Commanders. This defense have allowed the 4th most points to the quarterback position. I know that Bo Nix, last time we saw him out, only 7 fantasy points. It's kind of been an up and down season. You'll have these type of games where Bo Nix doesn't even get to, nearly 10 fantasy points, and he'll have his games. Like he had one game where he had almost 40 fantasy points. So you just don't really know what you're going to get with Bo Nix and this Denver Broncos offense. You are going to see R.J. Harvey now as your starting running back with J.K. Dobbins being out for the rest of the season. I really like what they have in the wide receivers, Courtland Sutton, as well as Troy Franklin. And we'll see what Evan Ingram can do in a nice matchup. But overall, I do see this as a very nice matchup for the Denver Broncos against the Washington Commanders. Just looking at his projected total points at 19.6, he is projected to get to 241.5 passing yards, as well as the pass touchdowns is set right now at 1.8. So this is a plus matchup for Bo Nix. So if you do have him on your roster, I would definitely give him a call, get to your starting lineup, because if he can't do it against the Washington Commanders, a defense that a lot of opposing quarterbacks have been able to figure out, this would definitely be the matchup for Bo Nix in this Denver Broncos offense. Now let's move on and stay in the division here with Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers, like the Broncos, coming off of their Week 12 bye week, so they're going to be refreshed. We'll see if Amari Hampton is back or not. Since his practice window just opened, I'm not really sure if he is going to be back or not. However, this Chargers offense has really been pretty good this season, especially, getting a guy like Kamani Vidal, replacing Amari Hampton. I know the last time we saw Vidal only had 3 fantasy points. They have a good matchup once again against Las Vegas Raiders, and the Raiders have allowed 20-plus fantasy points to 4 quarterbacks so far this season. So this has been a really nice matchup if you are a starting quarterback in the NFL. And Justin Herbert had a rough game in week number 11. I do expect a big bounce back for the Chargers. I mean, the Raiders defense let up a couple of passing touchdowns to Shadur Sanders in his first NFL start. But Justin Herbert, I expect for this whole entire Chargers offense coming off of the bye week, honestly wouldn't be surprised if they dropped 30-plus points on the Raiders defense. Now let's move on to our 2 starting running backs starts of the week. That's going to be Kenneth Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Jaylen Warren's still the RB1. But if you have seen the last couple of weeks of the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, Kenneth Gainwell has got a ton of production, both in the receiving game and the rushing game. This is a nice matchup going up against the Buffalo Bills, who have allowed 14 rushing touchdowns to RBs. So, is this going to be the game where Kenneth Gainwell continues to find the end zone? Could definitely happen, especially with that stat alone. But Kenneth Gainwell is projected to get to 10.9 fantasy points. Wouldn't be shocked at all at that. Like I mentioned, the production, the receiving, and the rushing game has definitely been there. So pair that with a matchup in his volume in this offense. I really like this matchup for Kenneth Gainwell, and that's why he's a start for this week. So is Devin Neal of the New Orleans Saints. Now, we are getting, like I mentioned, the injury news. Alvin Kamara is going to be out probably for the next couple of weeks, maybe even the rest of the season. We'll have to see the injury report coming out on Wednesday to see, if he's probably going to be a DNP on Wednesday, I would have to assume. But this is a really nice matchup. If Devin Neal does end up getting the start in this one, I am expecting him to get the start at this point. But against the Miami Dolphins, it feels like every opposing running back has been able to take advantage of the Miami Dolphins. But the Dolphins, as of late, their rushing defense has gotten better, but not better enough for Devin Neal to be a sit this week. This defense have allowed the 4th most rushing yards to the running back position. I know the New Orleans Saints are coming off one of their worst performances on the offensive side of the ball. Like I mentioned earlier when I put out the waiver wire video, Devin Neal got a lot of his production in the receiving game. That's definitely some good news because Tyler Shuck is going to be dumping the ball off plenty in this game against Miami Dolphins. So Devin Neal, go ahead and pick him up in your waiver wires and start him immediately because this is definitely going to be as good of a matchup as he's going to get the rest of the way. Now let's move on to our pass catchers, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. And Troy Franklin has really been a nice story coming out of Denver this season. I think a lot of talk of the town in the preseason was surrounding Courtland Sutton in this offense, but Troy Franklin has really stepped up as the 1A and 1B to Courtland Sutton. Like I mentioned, talking about Bo Nix's matchup against the Washington Commanders, it's going to be very nice for honestly like R.J. Harvey as a start this week, and as well as Troy Franklin. Obviously, you're starting Courtland Sutton against Washington Commanders, pretty much starting every Denver Bronco because this is going to be an offense that's going to put up some points this week. The Commanders have allowed the 3rd most points to the wide receivers, so that they have definitely been gettable against opposing wide receivers. So if you have Troy Franklin on your bench, or if you're lucky enough that he's still on the waiver wires, definitely go pick him up and go ahead and plug him in as your wide receiver 2 or into your flex spot. Now let's move on to the next wide receiver, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. And the theme of the 2025 campaign start whatever opposing wide receiver against the Dallas Cowboys. Look what Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown did. A.J. Brown has been an absolute dumpster fire this season, and he put up one of his best games of the season, over 100 yards receiving and 1 touchdown to go over 20 fantasy points. Could Xavier Worthy do that? Sure. Rashee Rice definitely going to do that against the Dallas Cowboys. But this Cowboys defense have allowed the most points to the wide receivers. So Xavier Worthy, I know he's been a roller coaster ride like many wide receivers have this season. So the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes coming off of a so-so performance in week number 12. But I do expect, honestly, a potential shootout here between really two talented offenses in the Cowboys and the Chiefs. So start Xavier Worthy along with Troy Franklin. Now let's move on to the tight ends that we're going to be talking about. I know that a lot of people are going to be very hesitant on starting this guy, Mark Andrews. He's coming off of a game where he only got 1 catch for 9 yards, good enough for 1.9 fantasy points. Does have a nice matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. If this is going to be the time that he has his blow-up game, it would be against his Bengals secondary that's been letting up a ton of yards and a ton of touchdowns to tight ends, excuse me. I know I put wide receivers. I apologize for that error. They have allowed 13 touchdowns to the tight ends this season. So they'll be giving up a ton of yardage as well as a ton of touchdowns there. So I could see this be like one of those games where we've seen in the past Mark Andrews put up not only 1 but 2 receiving touchdowns. This is a must-win game for the Baltimore Ravens if they do want to stay in the AFC North race. So I do expect a big bounce back overall for the Ravens offense as well as Mark Andrews. So go ahead and start Mark Andrews this week in a plus matchup against the Bengals. Also start Hunter Henry in the New England Patriots. At this point, Hunter Henry is a lock as a must start the rest of the season. I really don't care what the matchup is at this point, but a nice matchup is always a plus going up against the New York Giants, who allowed the 4th most touchdowns, to the tight end position. Hunter Henry, like I mentioned, talking about him earlier on the show, going through the studs of the week. Week 13 projected fantasy points at 10.3. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he goes over that and even finds the end zone there. So Hunter Henry, you just got to trust the red hot Patriots. They're rolling. They're at 10-2. Giants offense, you with Jameis Winston as your starting quarterback. We'll see Jackson Dart's going to be available. He's still he's been in concussion protocol the past couple of weeks. So this could be a potential game where the Giants stay in it. But I do like this matchup overall for Hunter Henry. So that is our starts of the week. Now let's go on to the opposite side of the spectrum. We'll go to the sits of the week. We're going to start with Daniel Jones of the Indianapolis Colts. And if you have a quarterback going up against the Houston Texans, to be honest with you, that's an auto sit. Houston Texans have been one of the top 5 defenses against opposing quarterbacks. And look what they just did against MVP winner. Just held Josh Allen to 10.12 points in that Thursday night win against the Bills. And the Texans are slowly creeping up on the Colts. So this is a big-time matchup for both the Colts and the Texans. If the Colts win this one, they're probably pretty much a lock to win the division at this point. But Daniel Jones, he's had some good games. He had some bad games. It's just the typical Daniel Jones that you're going to get. But this the toughest matchup on paper. So if you have another quarterback on your roster, you need to go pick one up. I would definitely sit Daniel Jones for this week. Now let's go on to our next running back. We're going to go to like a 1A, 1B, like we talked about Kenneth Gainwell. Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker have been 1A and 1B in Seattle. Now, Kenneth Walker is coming off of a nice game, 20 points in that plus matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Zach Charbonnet, what his bread and butter has been in the 2025 season has been the red zone touchdowns. And I just don't really see that happening against a tough Minnesota Vikings defense that allowed the 9th fewest points to running backs. Seattle has definitely been an offense that's been able to put up some points, and the Vikings with J.J. McCarthy and offense have definitely been, abysmal the past couple of weeks. So this could be another game that it could get away from the Vikings, and Seattle can just effectively run the ball. But this is a tough matchup on paper. Zach Charbonnet against this Vikings rushing attack. So if you have another running back or want to pick one up, I would look towards someone else other than Zach Charbonnet for Week 13. Now let's move on to our wide receiver sit, and Jameson Williams coming off of a pretty much nothing burger in week number 12 for the Lions. A tough matchup once again against the Green Bay Packers, and this Packers defense has really been solid. Pretty much the majority of this season, they have allowed the 6th fewest points to the wide receivers, and I just expect Jahmyr Gibbs and company to cook. Now, if you remember, last time that we saw these teams face off was week number 1. The Packers absolutely shut down this Lions offense before the Lions really got going. They got on a win streak there after week number 1. So you looked at the sample size already in 2025, and this is just a bad matchup on Thanksgiving against the Green Bay Packers at home. Now let's move on to our last sit of the week, Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Kyle Pitts has only got 1 touchdown this season. That came all the way back in week number 4, so it feels like it's been a decade since we've seen Kyle Pitts find the end zone. Now, the matchup is a really good one against the New York Jets, but, Kyle Pitts in a good matchup against the New Orleans Saints was 2 for 5 for 25 yards. It is a nice matchup. But, man, this offense at times has just been abysmal, no matter what quarterback it is, whether it's Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins is going to be the starting quarterback for the rest of the season, especially with Penix out for the rest of the year. But Kyle Pitts is just not a guy that you can really, put him in your starting lineup, get you 10 fantasy points. You pretty much need a touchdown for him to save the day for you. So there's definitely some better tight ends out there for you. So that is our Week 13 fantasy starts and sits. If you have any questions pertaining to starts and sits on your own roster, definitely go ahead and drop that in the comments. Also, if you have some trade questions as well, another trade deadline will be coming up here in a couple of days. So if you do have any last-minute trade questions, also drop that in the comments. All right, let's go ahead and shift our gears, and we will close out this show with how we did in week number 12. And as you can see there, we did bounce back. If you were with us on last week's show, we did lose. We were 7-4 heading into this matchup. We did lose to early on in the season when it was pretty much similar performances for both teams. But we ended up winning this one 118.16 to 84.3. So it wasn't a sexy score for both teams, but we will go through the breakdown of all that. As you can tell, he didn't really check most of his lineup as Joe Burrow still injured, but he will be returning this week. Jared Goff had 17.16 fantasy points in that overtime victory against the Giants. Looking at the running backs, even with Jahmyr Gibbs, he had 55.4 points on our head. He did have Devon A-Chain on the bye. I guess he just didn't check that. Our 2 running backs, pretty solid performances. Saquon Barkley, 12.4 points against the Cowboys. Chase Brown had 15 points against the Pats. Looking at the wide receivers, we dominated that at least on one end. T. Higgins had 8.1. Keon Coleman had 0. JSN continues to be the MVP for our team overall this season, 37.1 points in their win against the Titans. Emeka Egbuka, Baker Mayfield went down with an injury. Just really nothing going for the Bucs on Sunday night against the Rams, as he only had 6.2 fantasy points. Tight ends, Mark Andrews had a dud, 2.1. Tyler Warren, 9.5 points. I'll take it. But looking at our other flex, we did start George Kittle, which was definitely a choice there. 13.8 points ended up working out. But we're looking at our bench here in a couple of minutes. We probably made the wrong decision, but we did end up getting the victory. David Montgomery at 6.7 fantasy points. So he not only had Gibbs, but also Montgomery. So both of them combining for 60 points. Looking at our defenses, the Steelers had 10 against the Bears. Seahawks had 6 against the Titans. That would have been the game for the Seahawks to get their, 15, maybe 14 fantasy points, but nonetheless, 6 fantasy points for them. Kickers was a dud for both. Jake Elliott only had 2, and Chase McLaughlin had 1. Looking at our bench, we definitely should have started Emmanuel Wilson. I did pick him up. I was going back and forth on George Kittle and Emmanuel Wilson, but that's definitely going to be, if Josh Jacobs is out yet for another week. It is coming off of a short week. Packers play on Thanksgiving against the Lions. So if Emmanuel Wilson is in, due for a starting lineup, but we are probably going to be starting him once again. He is coming off of a 2-touchdown performance. Good enough for 26.5 fantasy points. So we moved 8-4 at 3-9, probably out of the playoffs at this point, but we will go through the rest of the matchups here. Now let's go to the DeBirds. DeBirds continues to be one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league. Moves to 10-2 for 125.16 to 92.76. Raquel's remarkable team having a rough year. We're at 2-10, excuse me. Tyler's talented team and Ben's best team. Ben's best team moves to 8-4. So it looks like we have a plethora of teams at 8-4. Looking at our next matchup, NBR takes down Jeff's scary team in kind of a low scoring battle, 92-82. NBR moves to 7-5. Jeff's scary team now at 4-8. And the game we were looking at, Doge versus Mushrooms. Mushroom falls, so now falls all the way to fourth place. Doge 7-5 with a 134-103 victory there. So let's go ahead and go to the overall standings, because this thing is going to get down to the wire, especially with Mushrooms losing now, going to 8-4. So like I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of teams. So the Birds is the only team to clinch a playoff spot at this point at 10-2. So he is a lock at the playoff. Looking at the overall standings, we are third place. But looking at Ben's best team, 8-4, we're 8-4 at third place. Mushrooms at fourth. NBR and Doge still in the playoff hunt at 7-5. Everybody else has been eliminated. But where this thing is going to really get down to the wire is the points for. As you see there, we are third overall in the league. We do need to kind of catch up to Ben's best team. We're going to need a high-scoring game against the Birds here. But the Birds, obviously, I mean, he's 10-2. He's probably the best team. But we are at third place overall. We're still ahead of Mushrooms, NDR, and Doge, which is good news once it comes down to the tiebreakers and all that. But that's where we stand. Points against doesn't really matter in the long term, but we are second in that category. All right, let's go ahead and go to our overall team. Then we will go through the waiver wire to see if we do need to add any players to the roster. We'll also give you some tips on some players that you need to be looking at as well. But don't have any buys this week, man. Jared Goff versus the Packers, definitely not doing that. We are going to be starting Bo Nix in a plus matchup against the Washington Commanders. Looking at our other options there, we could definitely go with Emmanuel Wilson. Looks like he's not starting, though, according to ESPN there. So we may just start, keep on rolling with our two tight end system, Tyler Warren and George Kittle. We could definitely, looking at drop, a guy like Alvin Kamara, he's probably going to be going on the injured reserve at any point. Troy Franklin, actually, I think at this point we are going to go with Troy Franklin in that matchup, kind of get a little stack there with Troy Franklin and Bo Nix. I do like, George Kittle's matchup against the Cleveland Browns, but Troy Franklin could really have an explosion game against the Washington Commanders. All right, so let's go ahead. I think that's going to be our lineup for now. I'll probably make some changes over the next couple of days. Let's go ahead and go to our waiver wire to see if we do need to add any more players. I think a potential player we could drop this week is Bam Knight. Looks like Trey Benson might be coming off of the injured reserve. So that would definitely be some big news there for the Cardinals. Let's go to the quarterbacks. Jordan Love actually would be a nice matchup, but we already have Bo Nix. So if you have like Jordan Love on your waiver wire, definitely add him there. He has a nice matchup against the Detroit Lions. Jacoby Brissett against Tampa Bay would definitely be a nice option. CJ Stroud against Indianapolis as well. So Jordan Love, Jacoby Brissett, CJ Stroud would probably be three quarterbacks I'd be looking at, as well as Trevor Lawrence against the Tennessee Titans. Other than that, don't really see any quarterbacks that really are catching our eye. Now let's move on to the running back position there. Amari Hampton. Man, I honestly think we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to try and claim Amari Hampton. Let's see. I think that we are going to try and claim Amari Hampton. And let's go ahead and go for Bam Knight. We could just plug in for now Amari Hampton. If we could get this, like have Amari Hampton in the playoffs, that would definitely be huge. So like I just did, if you have Amari Hampton, if somebody dropped them on the injured reserve and is on your waiver wire, go pick them up, put them on your IR, save them, especially if you've already clinched the playoffs. So that would definitely be a good strategy if Amari Hampton is available in your leagues. I'm not saying he's going to be available in a lot of leagues, but I mean, even a guy like RJ Harvey, he has a plus matchup against the Washington Commanders. I think I'm also going to make another claim there. Probably drop the same guy, maybe Emmanuel Wilson, since he's probably not going to be playing. So let's go ahead and get RJ Harvey and drop Emmanuel Wilson. So far, we made two claims for both Amari Hampton and RJ Harvey, trying to get some better running back depth there. Looks like Josh Jacobs is going to be returning, so that's definitely good news for the Packers. But let's go back to the running backs. I think that's the top two ads that I'm seeing, at least in this league. Other than that, I mean, if Trey Benson does come back, he does have a nice matchup against Tampa Bay. Tyjae Spears, kind of been up and down, but that's really the top of the litter there for the running backs. Let's go to the receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr. does have a nice matchup against Tampa Bay. He's really been solid with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Myers coming off a nice game, has a nice matchup against Tennessee Titans, same as Christian Watson against the Detroit Lions. So if you're in need of a receiver, go after Jacoby Myers or either Christian Watson or Matthew Golden. That could definitely be 2 or 3 guys that could definitely have a nice game and really good outings against defenses and secondaries that have given up a ton of yards to the receivers this season. Now let's move on to the tight ends. Also good matchups for guys like Dalton Schultz against Indianapolis, Theo Johnson against New England on Monday night, as well as Jawan Johnson against Miami. I know that I've talked a lot about Colston Loveland, Harold Fannin. I would stay away from those matchups, though. Like you see there, top 10 defenses against tight ends, so I'd hold off on both of those guys in tough matchups this week. But if you do need a tight end, go after Dalton Schultz, Theo Johnson, or Jawan Johnson for this week. Now let's go ahead and go to our defenses. The best streaming defense of the week is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans didn't do really well against one of the best defenses in fantasy football in the Seattle Seahawks, but Jaguars, I do like this matchup against the Titans. Other defenses, the Falcons against the Jets, that's a plus matchup for them, as well as the Chargers versus the Raiders, and the Bucs versus the Cardinals. I don't know, the Buccaneers, that was a tough matchup for them, but I do expect them to bounce back against the Arizona Cardinals. So if you do need a matchup, a defensive stream, go after the Jags, go after the Falcons, and as well as the Chargers. So that is just a little bit of the waiver wire, kind of some advice for you as you're looking at players, defenses to add for this week. So now with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and tie this thing up with our current matchup. And this is going to be a big-time matchup against the number 1 overall team, the Birds, who is sitting at 10-2 overall this season. We're at 8-4, so we can get a victory here, go to 9-4, really feel good about our playoff chances because we're only one game above of really being either in the playoffs or out the playoffs. This is a big-time matchup. As you can see, our previous matchup, the Birds did get us in Week 4. That matchup went 166 to 139. But his team is absolutely loaded. He has Drake May as the quarterback. His 2 running backs are Jonathan Taylor and James Cook. His wide receiver core, Puka Nacua, George Pickens, Kyle Pitts is his tight end. Woody Marks is just a stacked team. So this is definitely going to be a big-time matchup. We're going to need guys like Bo Nix to go off against the Commanders, same with Troy Franklin. But we'll see if we get any of those 2 running backs, either Amari Hampton or, RJ Harvey. Maybe we just go all in on the Denver Broncos this week. But that is the overall matchup. Other matchups to look at, Raquel's remarkable team and Ben's best team, a battle of 8-4 versus 2-10. Looks like Ben's best team is currently projected to win that one pretty convincingly. Jeff's scary team and Tyler's talented team. Jeff's scary team right now at the moment is projected to win that one. Most of these matchups are against like some of the best teams and the worst teams, but this one right here is definitely going to be huge between MDR and Mushrooms. But I think, we could look at all the other matchups, but this matchup is the most important for us. And the Birds right now is currently the favorite to win this one, but we will see what's going to happen there. But let's go ahead and look at the full box score just to see. I do want to see when his team. Let's go to the Birds team really quick. I do want to see when he will be finishing up. See if he has anyone on Monday night. Let me go to the fantasy cast here. I want to see when this matchup will be all set and done. Will this come down to a Monday night sweat or will this come down to a Sunday night sweat? So let's go ahead and pull up the fantasy cast just to see when this matchup is looking like to conclude, and that's going to be it for. So it looks like Drake Bay is going on Monday night. Do we have anybody on Monday night? Looks like we have one on Thursday though. Chase Brown. He has George Pickens going on Thursday, along with Brandon Aubrey. So that's definitely going to be most of it is going on Sunday. We have a couple on Sunday night with Bo Nix and Troy Franklin, but the majority of that don't see anybody on Monday night. We do have Saquon going on Friday. But we better have a lead going into Monday night because Drake May against the Giants is going to be a lot of points for the Patriots on that side. But that's going to be it for tonight's show. I really appreciate everybody for tuning in to tonight's live stream. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, chilling out with friends and family, watching football and sweating out your fantasy football team over the weekend. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week, probably back on our Wednesday night time frame as we look at week 14 in the final week of the regular season in fantasy terms. Then we'll get to the fantasy playoffs. That we'll also look at week 13 and what went down there. So I appreciate everybody for tuning into tonight's show. Enjoy the rest of your week and Thanksgiving. We'll see you back here next time. So long for now.